I think it would be a good idea if you can start with a little bit of intro about yourself and Metaview.
So hey folks, I'm Siadhal. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company called Metaview. We are building the AI assistant for the interview process. So what we have right now is a very finely tuned AI note taker built specifically for the recruiting process. So essentially it's really good at taking notes in interviews, in intake calls, in client update meetings, that sort of thing. It's really tuned for that specific situation. And what we're trying to unlock for folks is really, I guess, three things. One, make it so that when you're having these really important interactions with candidates or with clients, you're focused on the conversation and on the, engaging, being curious, all of those sorts of things, being persuasive maybe, as opposed to on note taking, because AI is really good at that now. Secondly, we make it so that when you sort of have to do the admin after those calls, whether that's putting together a cover sheet on a candidate or sharing the sort of your understanding of the brief with the client, all of that sort of regurgitation and repackaging of that information, our AI is really good at assisting you in doing that as well. So it helps you save you time essentially, and basically helps you show up better in those, after those interactions. And then the last thing is we just make it easy for you to access all of the information from all of those conversations. So if you think about, if you're a high hustle recruiting agency, you're having dozens of conversations with both candidates and clients, per recruiter every week. There's little nuggets of information that it's really hard to remember or find. And so you can just ask Metaview's AI, hey, who was the candidate who mentioned X or Y, or did this candidate mention they were willing to relocate? And it will just pop you the answer straight back to you. So yeah, that's what Metaview does.
Perfect.
We have awesome integration with Recruiter Flow too, which we can talk about. But yeah, that's what we're up to.
Perfect. It's a very interesting use case. It is one of the most time-consuming things to do, and frankly, a little boring as well. Once you've done the interview, because, typically how I operate is I do the interview. I'm 100% focused on the interview, and as soon as the interview is done, I would type down my notes in Recruiter Flow. I don't have to anymore because I have Metaview, right? So in a few minutes, Metaview notes are there. This it takes me to a very interesting question, right? So there is a lot of debate about with AI, right? Like almost every profession is going to change a little bit, right? Like we look at specifically recruiters, you are attacking note taking post interview or interview notes as a specific use case. What are some of the other use cases that you think are ripe for disruption with AI? In a very recruiters centric use case.
Yeah, I think we obviously think about this a bunch. Well, actually, I would actually say we probably think about this less than you'd expect a company like us would, because we're obviously an AI native company in the recruiting space, but we're one of the big veins of innovation that that these foundational AI capabilities are creating is essentially around the idea that unstructured data is now useful. And the conversations you're having with candidates was essentially unstructured data. And sometimes, as you mentioned, you would then try and structure that afterwards by putting information in boxes in your CRM or whatever it might be. But we just think there's a whole bunch of opportunity within just making use of the fact that this unstructured data, i.e. your conversations with clients and candidates, is now useful. So we almost exclusively think about that. So I think my opinions on like where else is really well placed to be affected by AI are not like especially interesting, but I'm still happy to share some. But I just think like I sort of know I know what I know, and then I sort of know what I don't know. Obviously seen some interesting cases around sourcing essentially, and there's some interesting models now around sort of using an AI to source candidates for you and only paying the AI on sort of an occasion where you want to actually screen that, which I think is like a really interesting business model innovation as well. I mean, it's essentially a reflection of how I guess the real world works, but still like a cool way to attach the quality of the AI's output to monetization, which I think is pretty cool. There's a lot of talk about scheduling, but I feel like that's not really a new thing. And I feel like actually getting scheduling right is is so much tougher than it sounds, just because understanding the priority of what's currently in your calendar versus the priority of this thing you're trying to schedule is a really hard thing to pull out of a human being's head. And so I think that's sort of there's definitely sort of work that's being done there that I think is exciting as well. And actually, I was at an event last night, and there was some really interesting things around actually just using AI's, so that ChatGPT specifically in this case, for recruiters to gain leverage through building their own software. So is there sort of, can recruiters out there get to this sort of basic enough level understanding of how to build little apps that help them, little, automations that help them in their workflow? They can instruct, ChatGPT, hey, I need some code that does this for me, and then utilize it. So I think that's a really interesting thing as well, is like how can, whether it's like no code or low code, well, essentially you can now move to a world where because you can just use natural language to instruct GPT to give you some code, you can actually build things that help you in your workflow that are very custom to you. So I think that's an interesting sort of trend as well, but the whole point is it's individual to each recruiter almost. So it just depends on what problem you're trying to solve.
No, makes sense. And I think that the last point about, writing code being much more democratized is not just relevant to recruiters, but pretty much the entire white collar world, right?
But I think the important thing is for recruiters to know that it definitely doesn't exclude them. Do you know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
I think there's a natural inclination among many people to think to essentially for there to be sort of a perceived barrier towards coding. And I think that like the more receptive you are and the earlier you are as an adopter to sort of get out of your comfort zone and start to think, well, actually, maybe in 2 years' time, it will be expected that operators in businesses of all sorts will, code little applets that help them with their job, and that's essentially how we're going to judge our sort of efficiency and productivity as individuals. So I do think there's like a never been a better time to start to break down those barriers that people may have around, I'm not technical, I can't do that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Coming back to Metaview, you recently raised a funding round. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Help us understand a little bit more about your thought process behind the fundraise and what you plan to do with all that money.
So we were venture funded before this funding round. So and we'd sort of, obviously, when we raised that cash, we had invested predominantly in product, and that will continue to be the case. But we'd invested a lot to the point where we knew we were going to rely on a future fundraising again. So there was like there wasn't like a ton of optionality at the time, but equally it was what we wanted. So it's like, it was a path that we'd chosen. We grew really well. Obviously last year, I mean, it still is, but last year was the sort of the breakout year for AI, and there was a ton of curiosity about how people could adopt AI within their workflow, within their sort of day-to-day. We definitely captured, I think, a good share of mind and really captured that zeitgeist for a lot of recruiters out there, which, obviously I was really pumped to see. I think that was great work by the team for us to react so quickly in the product and build features that people really loved, and then react to feedback and all those things. But essentially we grew really well, and we saw enough to think, or really we saw enough to sort of increase our conviction that the time is now for this category of product. Call recording has been in sales and in customer support as like a standard way, as a best practice for, close to a decade,
Ages.
frankly.
Yeah.
And that's because people really valued it was mainly a training tool, I would say, that the reason people had it. So sales managers could check on how sales people are selling. And if you're not hitting your quota, I can check out what's going on and coach you, because it's really important to me. And sort of similar in customer support. If there's a complaint from a customer, we can actually find out how did they. So there was just having a basic recording in those use cases was useful enough. We were around and trying to do the same for recruiting, but the reality was just having the recording and the transcript was not useful enough. There weren't enough times where you really needed that we, so we didn't have product market fit. When these foundational capabilities became available to us, and our ability to pull meaning and insight and automate certain things that recruiters had to do off the back of these calls, suddenly the demand for the products really increased. And so what that means is we think the time for this category is now. In many cases, when you're creating a new category, there's upfront investment you need to make, because much as the sort of the category might have mind share and people might be excited about the product, you're still building for a world where the category is going to be far more prevalent in future years. And so to set yourself up to I guess win in that scenario and be the go-to product for as many recruiters as possible, it's just really useful to have a bit of money in the bank.
Absolutely.
We're very product oriented as a company. I think that's just our DNA. I was a product manager, at Uber before starting the company. My co-founder Shara was a product engineer at Palantir. So we're just very product oriented. I think that's also a really good thing for this moment, because when you're building, and this relates to sort of what we're going to do with the money. When you have there's like thousands of completely novel capabilities we could work on, right? Things that no one in the world could have thought of building 18 months ago or 2 years ago. There's a ton of them that you can now think to build. And so the work of actually at a high velocity, getting product out there, features out there in front of customers, realizing this one doesn't work, moving on to the next, realizing, oh, there's something about this one, we need to sort of invest. That is the game right now, because we're only scratching the surface of what these LLMs are going to do for how we work. And the way you're going to find it out is by building stuff and finding out. So that's really what the idea was. We really wanted to increase our product velocity, which I already think is good. But the reality is, if you I don't want to sort of fall by the mythical man month sort of situation where sometimes you hire more people, you don't actually move faster. But there's, the fact is we think we can move faster on the product side and improve the quality of the product and, innovate with features. And that's a big focus. And then at the same time, as you become more of a part of people's workflow, which we have done for, we've got over 1,000 customers now. There's a bunch of things that are less about innovation, but are really important for quality of life. So I would say even, the integration work that we've done together, right? We have a bunch of customers who are on Recruiter Flow. Their experience was still good, but it can be better if we connect these two and if they speak to each other in the right way. And, so there's a bunch of integrations you start to think of as well, which are less about innovation. They're more about the, almost the furniture or the sort of the infrastructure of the product as a whole that we also wanted to stop neglecting, because we were so focused on these innovation things. Because we had limited resources, we sort of had to make really hard trade-offs about other ways that we could just, round out the product. And so that's what having a bit of money in the bank enables you to, stop operating in a little bit more of a feast situation rather than a famine.
That's a great way to put it. And it's in SaaS, right? Very, very difficult to build a new category or be the first mover in a category without a lot of firepower. And in my, I've been running SaaS products since a decade now, and I've seen only one company do that successfully. It's called Visual Website Optimizer. They created the A/B testing category. Other than that, I can't really remember any other examples who've done that. Now, so what are some of the very exciting things that are coming up on Metaview product roadmap?
Last year was all about individual productivity. So if I'm a recruiter, how can you save me time and help me have more leverage, show up better with candidates, save time on, some of my admin? That remains a really big theme for us. There'll be some innovation in that category, but it's more about essentially how can we get out of the way for these people and let them spend, be even more focused in their conversations, and spend even less time on their write-ups, but the write-ups are even higher quality. And there's like just a general line them up, then knock them down on the roadmap for that sort of thing. The areas where we think there's really interesting, where we'll be, I guess, almost adding to the surface area of the product and innovating, will be on two core themes. One is collaboration, and then the other is reporting. So collaboration, even in an agency client situation, hiring is and should be more of a team sport. We have in-house designers here at Metaview, but sometimes on certain projects use Figma. And actually, Metaview may only have sort of title, but everyone in the company has a Figma license, because we all care about the design of the product and we all have something interesting to say. And, if we can get our feedback in earlier, then we can, orient the design process in the way that we want it more quickly, rather than just having like a weekly sync where we get the chance to sort of, correct path. So I don't think it's completely like for like, the analogy, but I think that's a useful analogy to think about the way recruiting should increasingly go, which is how can you go to a world where actually everyone that's involved in trying to make a hire has a shared understanding of the context. And by that, I mean what we're looking for, where this person's strong and where they're weak, where they said something that we think is a flag, and how we can sort of try and really bottom that out in our next conversation with them. That sort of a world is what we're aiming for. And so there's, like, from a feature level, that we're investing a lot in collaborating around sort of those like magic moments or golden nuggets within interviews, maybe automatically identifying some of those things, and creating a world where recruiters can share really rich insights and information with their clients in order to improve their calibration. So I think collaboration and calibration sort of go hand in hand, and we sort of think of those as one sort of part of our roadmap. And then the second piece is around reporting. So I mentioned at the top of the call around, what is Metaview? There's these immediate tactical benefits, which I think are around productivity and collaboration. The long-term impact for some clients, I don't think this is a must for everyone, to be honest with you. I just think for those that it matters to, it will matter a lot. We've always believed that the most important data in your recruiting workflow, whatever, is essentially hidden in your conversations. And of course, under sort of duress, historically, you've sort of captured flecks of that information and stored it for later because you think, hey, that particular thing might be interesting. But of course, you're never going to be doing an amazing job of that. Point being, you now have access to all of the data in your conversational pipeline. That could be from clients, that could be from candidates. And there's a bunch of proactive reporting we think we can do around, or we are doing around that. So highlighting, scenarios, where, compensation expectations among candidates seem to be changing, and maybe that's a really useful piece of information to pass on to your client as they think about this, and sort of supports your point to them, maybe that, hey, this is not where we're going. Here's some data I have to show you over the last 6 months, conversations I've had, candidates, compensation expectations are changing, or whatever it might be, and we can, we literally graph that out for you. Or it could be even more. It could be somewhat more tactical than that. It could be, hey, you've just taken on this new rec. We've noticed this candidate who you spoke to 6 months ago, they weren't right for the role you were working on at the time, but actually they seem really appropriate given what you just discussed with the client. So those sort of the ability to detect really meaningful data points within your sort of your massive historic data is also what you'll see a bunch more innovation around. Yeah.
Very interesting. One of our listeners wants to use Metaview and are kind of confused. Hey, what can I do with this? What are some of the best use cases, right? Like really transformational uses of Metaview that you've seen. If you can give us a couple of examples, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'll probably push back a little bit on the word transformational for now. I think from a behavioral, from a sort of a emotional delight perspective, I think we do have that impact. Like, as I said, I worked at Uber before this, and obviously there was amazing product market fit at that company. I was at a time when it was growing incredibly fast, and we really felt like we just had the tiger by the tail. Obviously now at Metaview, I'm a much more important part of Metaview's growth than I was at Uber's, but I'm sort of feeling that again, like the people who are using the product, for them, they breathing a massive sigh of relief, and never heard the word game changer so much. So I appreciate its transformational in that respect of, yeah, my quality of life as a recruiter has gone up, and my ability to do great work has gone up, but it's still the same work. Do you know what I mean? It's not like it doesn't change how you need to go about your job. It just takes away something that was always getting in your way from actually doing all the things that you thought were more important and higher leverage. So I don't actually think there's this massive recruiting used to be done this way and now it's done this way because of Metaview. And maybe at some point these things will sort of build on top of each other, and we look back in 5 or 10 years and we're like, wow, this is totally transformed now. But I actually don't think that's where you're getting the most use out of AI right now. I think the best use of AI is quite practical. It's like, hey, I hate doing this thing. I hate doing it because I could do it on autopilot and it didn't feel like it was useful. So that's why I often didn't bother doing it. And now I can just remove that problem. And that's more the bucket that we're in. That's more the bucket actually that we think about having, even continued impact. That's sort of what we think about. Even the examples I gave you of, is there someone in your basically in your database of candidates who would be good match for this? That's an existing behavior, right? People go and do that sometimes. Now, sometimes they don't, because like, well, it's so hard for me to find this stuff, so I'm not going to bother. I might as well just, head over to LinkedIn or whatever and start sourcing for new people. But there at least it's an existing behavior. So yeah, I think we're a long way of saying I think we're very focused on existing behaviors. I think that we don't, big believer in the phrase, you sort of overestimate how much things will change in 1 year and underestimate how much they'll change in 10. So I think when you add all of these behavioral, customer focused features, capabilities, when you add them all up over time, you'll realize some of these earlier behaviors now don't even happen at all anymore because it's irrelevant because of this thing that happened 2 years later or whatever. But right now we're very focused on what are sort of immediately annoying things that recruiters have to do, and can we remove those things?
Great way to put it. And I'm sure, right? Like as soon as GPT-3 launched, the whole world changed. The way that the world looked at AI changed. What changed for Metaview?
Lots. So we were, as you mentioned, we were, we had many of the customers we had in, that we acquired through 2019, 2020, 2021, many we still have now. So the fundamental vision that those customers, I think those customers, they bought into the vision more than they bought into the product we had at the time. And the vision was around the data in your interviews is really useful. Don't you agree? And they're like, yeah, I do. Let's see if you can help me do something with it. And I would say we had little occasions where it would be really helpful, and we had certain features that were really popular with those users. But in terms of actually getting lots of products, we definitely weren't in that world. And so we were very open to, we wanted to grow fast. We want to become a really big, impactful company. We were very open to, burning some of our boats and innovating on the product and changing things. And so we very quickly experimented with essentially summarization. And again, the particular thing is a very finely tuned summarization that was very empathetic to the idea that this is a candidate and there's certain information that's more important about candidates that might not be so interesting in other meetings, or in other meetings, what I say might be interesting as the sort of the host of the meeting, but actually in the case of an interview, it's not interesting at all. We only care about this other human being. We're here to extract information from this human. Help me do that, please. So when we initially sort of experimented with this summarization in a very, frankly, hacky way with some of our existing customers, and it very quickly became the thing that they cared about most in the product, like by far. And so we switched to make that the focus of the product. So before that, we were helping with training modules for interviewers, and we would pull out some consistency data around how interviews are being run at the sort of almost like the basic metrics level. Things like, do you have times when your talk time is too high or your question count is too low? We still do these things. They're just not the center of the product. And and so that was a very big switch. And it also brought about which I think would be interesting to your listeners as well, just because I think this, there's always analogies in how to run any business. I think it also brought about a go-to-market motion switch. So we used to be very much a top-down sales, let's speak to the decision maker in a company to see if they want to buy this thing for their whole team, maybe even for the whole company. And because we switched to this end user benefit where, we were saving recruiters time and making their quality of life better, we switched to a bottoms-up motion where, individual recruiters can
expand
come to the website and, they don't have to speak to a member of our team if they don't want to. They can just start using the product. And I personally was a little bit skeptical about that change. But yeah, it turns out there's a ton of entrepreneurial and ambitious recruiters out there with a lot of initiative who wanted to try things out, and that really sort of changed the trajectory of our growth.
Yeah, I mean the classic land and expand kind of a model, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I think Slack did it exceptionally well. So there is a product that we, I think, both of our engineering teams might be using it, called Browser Stack. Another one, the API testing product that I forget its name. But yeah, both of these I think have perfected the land and expand model. And so is that your primary GTM right now?
It's now pretty much 50-50. So in terms
Very
of obviously
interesting.
customers we win, yes, it's mainly bottoms up. But in terms, obviously, some of our larger customers come in via maybe more traditional
The
means.
traditional sales-led motion.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the time,
Yeah.
the sales are to companies who have one or two users in already. One or two users in the company who are using the product and really love it, and it makes the sale motion much easier. Like on both sides, it makes it easier for us because they have good understanding of the product and good sentiment towards the product, but also easier on their side because one of the biggest things that a buyer of a software has is a fear that they're making a bad decision if they buy this one, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
this is going to mess up, and yeah, they've done a good demo, but actually it's not going to be that. And there's something I don't know, there's something I'm missing, and maybe they're tricking me. And even if that's only like 1% doubt in my mind, the fear I have of looking silly if I buy this thing is so sort of acute that I'm just going to do nothing. And so it basically takes that problem off the table and it makes it easier for them to have conviction and say, yeah, I think this is something that's going to help our team, so I'm going to buy it. So yeah, it's definitely like the PLG is crucial to both motions, if you know what I mean. It's crucial to the ones that just come in and start using it themselves and then add a few more seats and grow and grow and grow. Of course, it's central to that. It's also actually really useful on both sides to folks who are, not an end user of the product, but think this would be really useful for their team and want to validate that.
I want to understand, right? From since we're talking about the product, right? And whenever OpenAI or Meta or anybody releases these new models with new capabilities, what kind of what does it look like in your engineering? Because I'm sure you guys look at it very, very closely and are thinking, hey, oh, now this new capability is there. Like, I think the ChatGPT 4. I don't know. Are they calling it 4.0? What are they calling it?
I think
The
it's called
latest one.
4.0.
4.0, right?
Yeah, like
So
like in the letter O. O not meaning zero. O meaning
0. Yeah.
omni.
Yeah. No. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the 4.0, and I think the Gemini also had a fantastic new release. At least
Yeah.
it looked great on the demo. I don't think they've released it publicly yet. Um, what does the scene inside the Metaview engineering team look like?
Yeah. Well, because of the time of day, annoyingly, we're not usually all in the office like watching it together. So it's a lot of sort of like in the evening, some sort of oh wow, that's cool. We could this sort of thing. So it's more like I think it's just an excitement thing, really. And then there's like the dust settles, and we think about how we could use the capabilities. But overall, I would say it's a little bit more. So there's two things that I say are important to understand about how Metaview thinks about those things. One is strategically, we want to be set up to be beneficiaries of the improvements in these models, right? What we don't want is to build things that actually will be very easy for an LLM essentially to do itself. So every time there's a new version of whether it's GPT or whether it's Claude from Anthropic or whether it's Llama from Meta, every time they improve, we want our product to improve too. Because then we just get us and our customers just have a massive advantage. You have the smartest, biggest, most well-resourced companies on the planet working on these systems, and when they release something, your life gets better, and that's amazing. So we want to be set up like that. And so one of the lenses through which watching when you're sort of seeing the updates of what's happening in these in the foundational models is really just like tuning your radar almost of how do we continue to position ourselves to benefit from these things? So multimodality is like a really, great example. We wouldn't want to sort of go and, innovate in terms of, building voice into Metaview natively in some, so that, Metaview can talk to you or something. That wouldn't sort of make sense for us. It would be much better to actually, as that sort of matures and as we understand how to build that into a user experience, then we would just, benefit from that and get better and better. So one is like it's almost like a slightly slower response. It's just like, hey, are we still on the right side of that strategy here where we're going to consistently, our product will get better because theirs is better, rather than getting essentially cannibalized. And then the other is more customer focused, right? Listen, the customer problems we're trying to solve don't change when, OpenAI
new models come out.
Model. But it is incumbent on us to think if our solution can or should change. So so again, it's a little bit of I think you watch that stuff really, or you sort of get a deep awareness of what's happening there to prepare your mind. I think it's like, was the phrase fortune favors the prepared mind or something like that. I think you're more sort of preparing your mind for when you can apply it, as opposed to thinking, okay, ChatGPT can now do X or Y. What's our version of doing that in our product? And that sort of solution in search of a problem type thing is what you want to avoid. So yeah, I think that's how we think about it. I can imagine there might be a world out there where it wouldn't be crazy to be much more reactive and okay, there's this capability, let's try it out, let's see what happens. I think that would be interesting too. But in our world where we have quite a lot of customers who are relying on this for like an increasingly important part of their workflow, it's a little bit more like, let's really think about what this means for the problem we're trying to solve for our customers. That we've discussed this problem with 100 customers at this point. We're not just going to drop of a hat change to solve this other thing instead. We're like pretty committed to solving it. Yeah,
makes sense. I love what you said. Solution in search of a problem, and it's the wrong way of going about this, especially when you're dealing with something so new to you. It's very, very alluring. And I've seen not just us, so many other SaaS companies, other founders kind of fall prey to that. But I really like your articulation of avoiding that. Are there any any books, any podcasts, any resources that have had a transformational impact on you that you would like to recommend over here?
7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think, is really great. I think my big takeaway, I think sometimes it's probably different by person, but sometimes you sort of know something deep down, but you don't have the words to express it, which makes it less real to you. And so that's one of the reasons I think books are so great, because someone's gone sort of through the idea maze to come up with the words to describe this thing that we all sort of know. But it's really, and I think the one that sort of I constantly reflect on that one is basically focusing on your sphere of influence. I think the times when I get stressed out or annoyed about something, it's often when it's something that's not in my control. And there's this obvious axiom, which is there's no point in worrying about it. Focus on things you can control or influence. And if your ambition is to create your sphere, improve or enlarge your sphere of influence, fine. That is one of my, I do want to do that. But there's no point in worrying things outside it for now. Like, just focus on the things you can control and work towards. So I think that's been very transformational, as like I guess a phrase I revert to, and that's obviously one of the 7 habits. So yeah, just to give poignancy, let's just leave it there.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Siadhal. Great speaking with you, and thank you for doing this.